Have you ever heard the phrase blonde bombshell and wondered who made it part of Hollywood's vocabulary in the first place? In the early days of the American film industry, a young woman named Jean Harlow burst onto the scene with dazzling platinum hair, a mischievous grin, and a screen presence so magnetic that audiences simply couldn't look away. Her story is more than just a tale of old Hollywood glamour. It's a saga filled with twists and turns that illuminate the tough realities behind the glitter. Prepare yourself for a captivating look at a life that's skyrocketed from humble beginnings in Kansas City to the bright lights of Los Angeles, propelled by a mix of luck, ambition, and fate, only to culminate in one of the most shocking and heartbreaking endings the film world has ever seen. Jean Harlow, born as Harleen Carpenter on March 3, 1911, was the first child of a prominent Kansas City dentist, Dr. Montclair Skip Carpenter, and his wife, Jean Poe Carpenter. While she would later be known by millions of fans, those earliest years were marked by a private nickname, the Baby. For the first 5 years of her life, she believed it was her actual name, so devoted were her parents to doting on her. Both mother and daughter developed a close-knit bond that would follow them from city to city, studio to studio. The adult Harlow would eventually joke that her mother was impossible to live without, a statement that held more gravity than any director's call of action on a Hollywood set. Her parents' relationship hit the rocks when Harlow was still in school, leading to a divorce that put young Harleen squarely in her mother's custody. This was no small matter. Her mother, who eventually became widely known as Mama Jean, had a relentless drive and unwavering ambition that might have rivaled those of any Hollywood producer. Once she gained full custody, Mama Jean whisked her daughter away to the West Coast, hoping to launch the child's career in a budding entertainment industry. Hollywood in the 1920s was a land of dizzying possibilities. Flickering silent films, new talkies bursting onto the scene, studios scrambling to find fresh faces who could translate well into the newest film formats. Yet ironically, even in such an open environment, Jean was told she was too old to begin an acting career, a laughable notion considering she was barely out of childhood. Discouraged and, more importantly, running low on funds, the mother-daughter duo packed up their hopes and returned to Kansas, putting a temporary halt to Mama Jean's Hollywood dreams. Yet that pause proved brief. Harlow soon enrolled at the Ferry Hall School in Lake Forest, Illinois, where she tried to settle into a more traditional adolescent life, a far cry from the glitz of the West Coast. It was at this school that she met a young man named Charles McGrew, who came from a privileged background. The attraction between them was intense, and it wasn't long before the two decided to run away together. Jean was only 16, full of youthful fervor and the desire to carve her own path. McGrew turned 21 and received a substantial inheritance, setting the newlyweds up in comfort. They chose Los Angeles as their home, a place that felt brimming with opportunity, offering McGrew the indulgence of wealth while offering Harlow an unspoken chance to revisit the dream she'd once been told was out of reach. This period was a whirlwind, with fancy cars, lavish gatherings, and an environment where the lines between socialization and career possibilities often blurred. If you were in the right place at the right time in Hollywood, it wasn't unheard of to land a movie contract on the spot. In many ways, Harlow's introduction to the film industry arrived almost by coincidence. She befriended another aspiring actress, Rosalie Roy, who often needed a ride to the Fox Studios lot for auditions or meetings. Rosalie lacked a car, so Harlow, with time on her hands, would drive her there and wait outside until she finished. During these waiting sessions, studio executives couldn't help noticing the striking young woman in the front seat of the car. Her blonde hair, though not yet platinum, and her relaxed, confident aura drew them like moths to a flame. Before long, Fox executives were offering her work as an extra. At first, Harlow brushed them off. She was married, financially comfortable thanks to her husband's inheritance, and had no burning need to toil in bit parts. She repeated her refusal multiple times, making it clear that she wasn't particularly interested in performing. But fate is persistent in Hollywood, especially when an agent or a studio sees star potential. The calls kept coming, the offers became more enticing, and crucially, Mama Jean re-entered the picture, urging her daughter to give the film world a second thought. Jean Harlow somewhat reluctantly conceded. Sometimes the best decisions begin with a gentle nudge from an insistent mother, and so Harlow started her career in small ways. One of her earliest jobs was as an extra in the 1928 film Honor Bound, an experience that didn't exactly resemble the glamorous Hollywood dream. She made $7 a day and received a boxed lunch. That meager compensation gave her a first glimpse of what it would mean to persevere in the film world. The sets, heavy lights, and constant buzz of activity intrigued her, though. She began to sense that there could be real potential here if she was willing to navigate the uncertain path from extra to star. She soon nabbed minor roles in Moran of the Marines and Chasing Husbands, providing further glimpses into the underbelly of Hollywood, where not every part was big and most days were long. But it was enough to get her noticed. The Hal Roach Studios, known at the time for comedic shorts starring the likes of Laurel and Hardy, took an interest in the poised blonde with a quick smile. Harlow ended up signing a 5-year contract, a remarkable achievement for someone who'd initially refused to do extra work. She made appearances in a few Laurel and Hardy shorts, including Double Whoopee, Liberty, and Bacon Grabbers. In the latter, she was even credited as a co-star, signaling a step up from background girl number 4 to someone the audience might actually notice. Meanwhile, as her career took these baby steps, her personal life was hitting snags. Her marriage to Charles McGrew, which had begun with so much youthful optimism, soon revealed strains. Harlow was spending long hours on set, exploring new ambitions, while McGrew perhaps expected a more conventional relationship, especially with all that inherited money at his disposal. Their once idyllic union began unraveling, and by 1929, they divorced. That same year, her time with Hal Roach Studios came to an abrupt end. Tensions at home, fueled by the collapse of her marriage, overshadowed her professional obligations. Whether it was her unsettled state of mind or the studio's frustration with her erratic schedule, the partnership dissolved. Harlow returned to living with her mother, who had remarried, and found herself at a crossroads. Should she walk away from this unpredictable Hollywood life or keep forging ahead, hoping to catch a truly meaningful break? The turning point came when actor Ben Lyon entered the picture. He was involved in Howard Hughes's ambitious war epic Hell's Angels, a film that was notorious for pushing boundaries with its aerial stunts and new sound technology. Hughes needed a last-minute replacement for actress Greta Nissen. Nissen's Norwegian accent felt jarring to early talkie audiences, making the role unconvincing. Lyon suggested Harlow, maybe not a household name, but a talent worth exploring. She auditioned, and with her breezy Midwestern accent and fresh face, she landed the part. Howard Hughes, always attuned to the marketable potential of a beautiful actress, offered her a 5-year contract. In 1930, Hell's Angels was unleashed upon the world. It became the highest-grossing film of that year, rocketing Harlow to international fame, virtually overnight. The audience couldn't get enough of this vivacious blonde, whose on-screen allure was unlike anything they'd seen before. She wasn't poised in a polished, aristocratic way. She was raw, vibrant, modern even. Her slightly irreverent charm melded with a comedic spark in her eyes, making her impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Jean Harlow was the name on everyone's lips. One might think that with such a sensational debut, offers would come flooding in. They did, but Hollywood is a tricky place. Despite her new stardom, Harlow's next appearance, an extra role in Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, didn't even make it to the final cut. But that minor disappointment hardly mattered because Howard Hughes had other plans for her. The resourceful billionaire producer, aware that novelty needed reinforcing, sent Harlow on promotional tours for Hell's Angels, sending her to New York, Seattle, Kansas City, and more, letting audiences see her in person. She became something of a curiosity, with fans flocking just to catch a glimpse of this new it girl. Along the way, she caught the attention of Abner Longy-Zwillman, a mob boss smitten by her beauty. Such clandestine associations were not entirely uncommon for rising starlets in the early Hollywood era, and while it might sound scandalous, it also underscored the lengths to which some admirers would go to ingratiate themselves. Zwillman reportedly gifted her a red Cadillac and arranged for her to do 2 films with Columbia Pictures, further testament to her allure and her precarious position in an industry rife with behind-the-scenes deals. That 2-picture deal led to a film called Gallagher, soon renamed Platinum Blonde. The new title was a blatant nod to Harlow's now famous hair, which had become an emblem in its own right. Though her natural shade was more of an ash blonde, the studio decided to intensify it to an almost glowing platinum through a harsh chemical mixture rumored to include ammonia, bleach, and Lux soap flakes. The result was iconic, an otherworldly halo that made her stand out among a sea of brunettes and more subtle blondes. After Platinum Blonde premiered, Howard Hughes' marketing team launched a contest offering a $10,000 prize to anyone who could replicate Harlow's exact hair color. Not one of the eager contestants managed to pull it off, solidifying Harlow's look as singular and unattainable. By then, MGM executives were eyeing her star power. Among them was producer Paul Byrne, who also became intimately involved with Harlow. Eager to secure her talents, MGM bought her contract from Hughes for $30,000, an impressive sum at the time. Finally, she began landing leading roles that offered more substance than a mere display of her beauty. Her first major project under MGM was Red-Headed Woman, a romantic comedy that demanded she wear a red wig. During filming, her co-star Anita Page walked right by her without saying hello, leaving Harlow hurt and confused until she realized Page simply didn't recognize her underneath that fiery hair color. Sensitive and often vulnerable beneath her outward bravado, Harlow reportedly cried over the slight. This episode highlights that despite her star status, she was still a young woman navigating a tough industry that didn't always see her as more than a photogenic commodity. MGM then cast her opposite Clark Gable in Red Dust, another big success that showcased a growing on-screen chemistry between Harlow and Gable. Off-camera, the studio had its own ideas about how to keep Harlow's image interesting, even manufacturing a backstory that she was a descendant of the famed writer Edgar Allan Poe. Anything to add mystique. They also spotlighted her in charitable endeavors, producing pictures of her at orphanages or charitable events to soften her vampish public image. But it was during the filming of Red Dust that her personal life took a tragic turn. Her new husband, Paul Byrne, was discovered dead in their home, an apparent suicide. Almost immediately, rumors swirled that Harlow had murdered him or that she'd driven him to despair. The tabloids feasted on every salacious detail. The police, however, concluded that Byrne had indeed shot himself. The question of why lingered, overshadowing Harlow's blossoming career and placing MGM in a precarious spot. At first, Louis B. Mayer, MGM's head, considered pulling her from Red Dust entirely, fearful that this scandal would sink the film's box office potential. But Gable's co-star, Tallulah Bankhead, refused to step in, remarking that punishing Harlow for her husband's misfortune would be monstrous. Observing Harlow's behavior on set, her professionalism, and her stoic determination to continue working, Mayer relented. She soldiered on, filming as though nothing tragic had happened, at least in public. Red Dust was released in 1932 and proved a hit, and Harlow and Gable would go on to collaborate in 4 more successful films. The star who once seemed too sensitive to endure a casual snub was now somehow weathering a media storm that would have overwhelmed many. Tragically, her greatest battle wasn't with scandal. It was with her own body. The behind-the-scenes demands of Hollywood, with its punishing schedules, heavy costumes, and early filming hours, wore down even the healthiest of actors. Jean was physically fragile from the outset, though. During a fundraising trip to Washington, D.C. for the March of Dimes organization, she caught influenza. Filming on what would be her final movie, Saratoga, began amid these health troubles, and soon she developed sepsis. She managed to fight it off after 2 months, returning to the set in a display of courage that belied the serious condition of her body. Yet her complaints persisted. She felt ill, exhausted, and in pain. The studio doctor diagnosed her with influenza once again, and MGM pushed her to keep working. On set, her co-star Una Merkel observed that she was gaining weight rapidly but not in a healthy way. Harlow often had to lean on Clark Gable during scenes, finding it increasingly difficult to stand. Day by day, the once lively starlet was withering in plain sight. One day, Gable kissed her on the cheek and noticed the strong odor of urine on her breath. This alarming sign pointed directly to kidney failure. Desperate, they summoned an outside physician, Dr. Leland Chapman, who recognized immediately that Jean Harlow was in the end stages of kidney failure, no mere flu or brief infection. By June 6, 1937, she had slipped into a coma and never recovered, passing away at the heartbreakingly young age of 26. The official death certificate cited acute respiratory infection, acute nephritis, and uremia. But the real tragedy was the slow, unrecognized decline that might have been detected sooner if the Hollywood machine hadn't been so intent on keeping its stars on set at all costs. News of her death reverberated throughout Hollywood. In the MGM commissary, an environment typically filled with the hum of lively conversation among actors and crew, there was a stunned silence for 3 hours. People simply didn't know how to process the idea that someone so vibrant, so young, and so influential could suddenly be gone. Saratoga, the film she had been working on at the time of her death, was completed using body doubles for her remaining scenes, with careful camera angles to hide the substitutions. When it premiered 2 months later, it became the highest-grossing film of 1937, a testament to Harlow's enormous popularity. For fans, watching her final on-screen moments was as haunting as it was compelling. They were witnessing the last performance of a star taken too soon. Tributes poured in from all corners, including an unexpected one from blues musician Lead Belly, who was in prison when he heard of Harlow's death. Struck by the loss, he wrote a heartfelt song titled Jean Harlow, capturing a spontaneous outpouring of grief that resonated with countless admirers. Over the ensuing years, her mother continued to promote Harlow's memory. A novel written by Jean Harlow called Today is Tonight was discovered and published posthumously in 1965, adding an intriguing literary facet to her legacy. She also received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a permanent marker of her contributions to cinema. By then, many had come to view her as a trailblazer for actresses like Marilyn Monroe, whose own platinum hair and comedic persona drew a direct line back to Harlow's example. Looking back, it might be easy to see her story solely in terms of tragedy. She achieved stardom quickly, fell into scandalous rumors, and died before she could experience a prolonged golden age. Yet Jean Harlow's impact was nothing short of groundbreaking. She brought an unfiltered vitality to an industry that was transitioning from silent films to talkies. She proved that a woman could be comedic, sexy, and emotionally resonant all at once without neatly fitting the preconceived molds of the era. Unlike many of her contemporaries who strove for an aloof, almost aristocratic persona, Harlow played characters who were daring, scrappy, and unapologetically themselves. The camera adored her. Audiences felt connected to her. She was the baby, a moniker from her childhood that in many ways symbolized her delicate spirit amid Hollywood's fierce competition. That said, her life also stands as a cautionary tale for the industry, highlighting the costs exacted on young stars who are pushed to keep performing despite severe health issues. In a world that prioritized profit, image, and deadlines, Harlow's mortal fragility was brushed off as a series of minor ailments until it was too late. Modern audiences might look at this as an artifact of a less enlightened era, but even today the struggles of young celebrities often occur behind closed doors, away from prying eyes, until a breaking point is reached. Jean Harlow's story reminds us that every star is human, susceptible to heartbreak, illness, and misfortune, no matter how radiant they appear on screen. Harlow's entire career spanned only 9 years, an astonishingly brief period in which she became one of the highest paid and most sought-after actresses in the world. She sat next to titans like Clark Gable, influenced style trends across the globe, and sparked frenzies with her distinct hair color. Yet she remained a tender soul, a woman who wept at a co-star's unintentional slight, and who overcame heartbreak, scandal, and personal loss to keep delivering memorable performances. She embodied resilience, finding ways to bounce back from personal crises like her divorce from McGrew and the shocking suicide of Paul Byrne. She exhibited professional courage by continuing to film Red Dust amid horrifying rumors, refusing to let tragedy define her legacy. In doing so, she carved out a space for herself in an era when studios often had the final say on an actress's future. If you take a moment to watch one of Harlow's classic films today, be it Hell's Angels, Red-Headed Woman, Red Dust, or Platinum Blonde, you'll see a performer who could make you laugh, root for her, or even gasp at her audacity. You'll see a woman way ahead of her time, dripping with irreverent charm, challenging social norms about how female characters could behave. You'll glimpse the complexities of a Hollywood in transition, a world still grappling with censorship boards, and the new wave of sound pictures, all while forging myths around its biggest stars. And in her luminous eyes, you might sense her unspoken desire to be acknowledged, not just for her hairstyle or her figure, but for her genuine talent and heart. To think she was only 26 at the end, barely older than a college graduate today, beggars belief. Contemporary fans and historians alike can only imagine how far she might have soared if medical knowledge had been more advanced, if the studios had eased up on their strenuous schedules, and if the tabloids had left her personal sorrows alone. Could she have become one of those grand dames of Hollywood, stepping gracefully into character roles later in life, leading philanthropic endeavors, or writing more novels? Yet those fleeting years were enough to cement an unforgettable legacy. Jean Harlow's distinctive persona still pops up in cultural references and tributes, Actresses who adopt a comedic yet provocative style are often called the modern-day Jean Harlow, even if they might not realize the depth of that comparison. The platinum blonde archetype, pushing boundaries with a sly wink, has reappeared in various forms, a testament to how thoroughly Harlow set the standard. And for many film buffs, a trip back in time to 1930s, Hollywood wouldn't be complete without seeing Harlow spar with Clark Gable in a witty exchange or blow a playful kiss in a comedic scene, captivating the screen in a way only she could. There's also the poignant detail that a novel she wrote, Today is Tonight, was only published almost 3 decades after her death. In that piece of fiction, fans and literary critics alike get to see a different side of her, an author crafting stories, perhaps looking for a creative outlet beyond the film set. If you haven't seen a Jean Harlow film, consider this your invitation. Watch how she seizes every scene, how she shares comedic banter with ease, and how she can portray heartbreak as convincingly as she throws off a smart remark. You'll understand why, even after all these years, her passing is still viewed as one of the most significant losses in early Hollywood. Some might say her short life only amplifies her legend. Like a comet blazing across the night sky, her brilliance was impossible to ignore, but all too brief. She stands alongside other luminaries who died at a young age, leaving behind a potent combination of myth and longing. In Harlow's case, the legacy is clear. She revolutionized the blonde bombshell archetype, pioneered comedic seduction on film, and broke hearts with her all-too-real vulnerabilities. Her stories aren't just relics of an old era. They encapsulate universal themes of ambition, love, loss, and the price of fame. So the next time you find yourself browsing classic films or stumbling across a vintage movie marathon, pause on one of Jean Harlow's titles. Notice the quicksilver smile, the playful eyes, and the emotional nuances that show a woman who is more than a poster image. Remember the teenage girl who fled to Hollywood with her first husband, the extra who said no to Fox executives until her mother convinced her otherwise, the star who was forced to endure personal tragedy under a public spotlight. Each phase of her life is a chapter in an enthralling story that culminates in a heartbreak that still echoes nearly a century later. And so, we come to the end of this reimagined look at Jean Harlow's life, a star who experienced a swift rise, significant heartaches, and an untimely passing. It's a reminder that every shimmering name on a marquee has a story, often more complex than the public will ever know. For Harlow, the story includes a mother's unrelenting ambition, an improbable start as a reluctant extra, a scandalous personal life that tested the resilience of an entire film studio, and a final battle with illness that ended a brilliant career just as it was taking off. Yet the echo of her laughter, the warmth of her presence, and the flashes of her talent endure. Whether you're a classic film buff or a casual fan curious about the legends of early Hollywood, her tale holds a fascination that few can match. There's so much more to explore, of course. Every film, every relationship, every rumor, and every behind-the-scenes anecdote is like a puzzle piece, contributing to a fuller portrait of the remarkable woman behind the screen persona. But for now, let this be an invitation to discover or rediscover Jean Harlow, the original platinum blonde whose legacy refuses to fade. Seek out one of her iconic films and see for yourself how she balanced comedy, sensuality, and a surprising depth of emotion. And when you've finished, come back for more stories of the stars who lit up Hollywood's golden era. After all, there's an entire universe of legends waiting to be unveiled. Some soared for decades, others for only a few short years, but each left an indelible mark on cinema's grand stage. Jean Harlow may have been with us for a tragically brief moment, but her impact remains as bright as ever, shining a light on both the dream and the cost of Hollywood stardom. Stay tuned for our next deep dive into the lives of the stars who once ruled the silver screen and continue to capture our imaginations today.